Henry Charles Jack was born on January 23, 1922 in the country of Essex, England. His family was immediately forced out of England by ship to Australia when he was only 2 years old due to indefinite reasons. This wouldn't be the only time he was forced out of his country or home. Family settled in Albany, Western Australia, which looked very similar to the shores of England at the time, where they would live very close to a large fishing pier. This is where the love of the sea began for Henry and became apparent in this picture of him wearing a sailor's hat and smoking a pipe. Henry eventually went by his third name, Jack, as he always preferred the name more so than Henry. His love for the sea would come in very handy, as the merchant navy were imploring for young men to join the war at sea and fight for king and country. Back in the days of World War II, it was expected of young men to enlist in either Air Force, Army, or Navy, otherwise they would be referred to as a coward in the eyes of friends in their country. If men of a certain age did not enlist for the war, they were sent white dove feathers as a sign of cowardice, so diaspora, as a whole, was basically expected and forced upon more frequently than it is in today's society. Jack's rank was an engineer, and he was in charge of the machinery on board the ship SS Fort St. Antoine. These pictures depicted his love for machinery and how tech-savvy he was for this period in time. He saw frequent action all across the Atlantic Ocean and was always on alert. There was never time to rest. Serving in the merchant navy was the most dangerous role in the war due to heavy German submarine activity in the Atlantic, known as the Wolf Pack, who sunk millions of Allied shipping. It was made more hazardous as most merchant ships weren't armed and weren't protected in the early years of the war until 1942, when the convoy system came to be. One of the most harrowing experiences he endured was when his ship was attacked by a submarine and his captain, who he had always admired, was KIA during the attack. This experience would eventually scar him emotionally for life and lead to a dark and disturbing past, where he used alcohol to escape from his loss of his captain and the savageries of war. During Jack's time at war, he visited many ports during his period in the merchant navy, where he was exposed to the perils of war. In this interesting picture, he wrote on the back of an old photograph the recipes for a gin sling and a Glover special while stationed in Singapore. Gin and sling was one of the more popular drinks back in World War II and was quite coveted by men of war for its strong yet refreshing taste. In an age where finding a recipe is as simple as going onto Google, searching the internet for it, hidden recipes nowadays are very few and far between. To have a recipe for an alcoholic beverage concealed like this is quirky, to say the least, even for that particular time period, but the fact that it was on a photograph in the first place could suggest it was swiftly taken down on the first piece of paper within reaching distance. Once the war was over and he left the Navy, he went on to utilise his engineering expertise, specialising in the field of motor. However, this would not satisfy his lust for adventure, as upon returning home he found it difficult to settle again in Albany. His restlessness resulted in him travelling Australia, where he tried his hands at mining at Western Australia gold mine Kalgoorlie, working on the engines. This also saw him travel to Queensland and Adelaide until finally settling in Sydney. This type of activity is actually still quite common nowadays, as most men who come back from the war cannot return to their lives, which they consider to be boring and uneventful, and are still depicted through media. They yearn for the excitement and thrill that war gave them, and in turn try to find other ways to reenact that experience. In the end, however, Jack could not escape his time at war and was traumatised by the terror that was World War II. War was depicted as an adventure at first in the media, but was later revealed as hell on earth. This type of media exploit still happens to this very day. Promises of leaving home for an adventure and a new life, which eventually led to psychological images of horror and despair, which even now haunt many men, both young and old.